All right, everybody, welcome to video 2. So we learned in video 1 about the 3 types of muscle cells, and we started to talk about the muscle system or the muscular system in general. Now let's get into what a muscle is and what it does. So, muscular functions. Number 1, obviously, we talked about this, is to produce movement. And what will happen is it basically controls almost all of the movements that happens within your body. Now, anything that would be like on the microscopic level, I don't know, let's say moving of neurotransmitters or something, that doesn't count. But as far as your movements, controls them all. It's going to enable you to respond quickly. So, in essence, to move out of the way. And you guys take that for granted. But let's say you're driving or someone's walking down the hall or something jumps in front of you. The ability to get out of the way quick is, again, producing movement. Whoops. And the external stimuli can be anything. And that could be a sound. That could be something that you see. It could actually even be something that you smell. So if you smell something bad or you smell something burning, that may be a response that you will do quickly to an external stimuli. Maintaining posture we talked about already. This, again, posture is the ability not to fall over. Because gravity is pulling down. That's your gravity pulling down like that. So it wants to pull you down. So with the help of your bones and your muscles, it will help you stay erect. Or even if you're seated, that'll allow you to stay without falling over. And we talked about young babies, how if you put them on there, sitting them up or in a chair, they will fall on the floor. So they haven't quite figured out the whole maintaining posture yet. Stabilizing joints. We talked a lot about these guys here, your tendons. Now, some of you may have had injuries to your tendons playing sports, or maybe your dog ran into you. Any of those things could have happened, but assuming that did not happen to you, keeping your joints stabilized with the help of the muscles and the tendons will hopefully serve you a nice long life of moving freely. And this is the one that we don't even think about. Well, except if you sweat a lot, then you think about it. But when muscles move, heat is the byproduct. And you're going to see that a lot of the energy lost, each and every movement is through heat. Now, you're going to use this thing called ATP. Now, we didn't learn about it yet, but this is called adenosine triphosphate. And this is it's almost like the energy currency of your body. And you're going to make it through a process known as cellular respiration, which again we'll talk about in, I believe, the 3rd video. But anyway, you need ATP to contract every single muscle. And all of that excess energy, 3/4 of it, that's a lot, is going to escape as heat. Now what we do to kind of keep yourself from overheating is we're going to sweat. Now if it's dry, we're pretty much sweating every second of every day. But if it's dry enough, that little layer of sweat evaporates and it cools you off. It's called evaporative cooling. In the event that you are doing strenuous exercise or the air is very, very humid, you will start to sweat even if you're sitting still. So you'd be surprised how much heat your body actually produces. And again, we take for granted things like air conditioning and rooms that are not 100% humidity, like in the middle of the rainforest. So just remember that heat is escaping every single time, even if you're not even moving, because remember, you're making micro adjustments all the time, and 3/4 of that energy is released as heat. Very big deal. And of course, keep in mind that in your body, 40% of your body and its mass is skeletal muscle. It's huge. Now, obviously, you got fat and you got organs and you got bones and stuff, but the mass of most people is skeletal muscle. So there is a tremendous amount of heat generated every second of every day. And when you sleep at night, if you're in your bed, there's you in your bed right there, there's your bed. If you do not have covers on, you will wake up very quickly freezing. If you have the covers over you, it's not that the covers are warm, but what they do is the heat that escapes, they trap it. So that's why you stay warm. So if you are hot at night, you might kick off the covers. Whoosh, get rid of them. If you're cold, you may pull them back on. So that's how we regulate our temperature. And then sometimes if you keep your blankets on, you might wake up actually sweating, which is, again, maybe a problem. So now as for skeletal muscles, let's talk about their activity. And what is going to happen is there's going to be a stimulation from your nervous system that's going to cause your muscles to contract. Now, there's a couple of words here. It's called irritability and contractility. Basically, what those two are words that say, I am going to receive a signal, so that's my irritability, and then I'm going to respond to that. And you're going to see that is in the nervous system as well, so that'll be coming up later as in our video series possibly. But irritability is the ability to receive and respond to a stimulus. So you can sense your nervous system sends your muscle a signal, and your muscle will contract. So that's your receiving and you're responding to that stimulus. And the actual ability for muscles to do that is called contractility. And basically what that is a muscle will shorten, and by shortening, that is going to allow bones to move, and that will get you out of the way. And again, there has to be an adequate stimulus that is received. So we'll talk about what that means in a second. So there's an action potential, but we'll talk about that coming up soon. Now, muscle itself, there's two major fibers in muscle, and they're called actin and they're called myosin. So if you look in both of these pictures, this here is a contracted muscle, and this is one that is what is known as relaxing. And once again, if they don't push out, they relax or they lengthen, and when they contract, they shorten. And the myosin doesn't change, but you'll notice the actin, which sort of kind of looks like these little chain link fence things. What they'll do is when the muscles relax, they are not overlapping. And when the muscle contracts, they do overlap. So that's how your muscles will change their length, by the interactions between actin and myosin. Now, what the heck is this thing called an action potential, which I mentioned earlier? Now, an action potential is this signal that's sent by a nerve, and what will happen is the nerve will send this signal, and what's kind of cool about it is you either send it or you don't. You can't kind of send it. So you send the signal to a muscle, the muscle will react, or you don't send it. That's it. Now, how this works, and you have to kind of imagine this, is a motor unit is one motor neuron. Now, we kind of talked a little bit about these when we did our intro chapter, but a motor nerve is a kind of tell you what to do nerve. So it's going to come from your central nervous system or your brain, or your spinal cord actually, and it's going to go to a muscle. Now remember, muscles are made up of a lot of muscle cells. So what's going to happen is this motor nerve is going to then branch out, and it's going to go to many muscle cells within the same muscle, up to 100. That is what is known as a motor unit. Because if you sent every nerve to every single muscle cell you had all at the same time, you can forget it. You'd have so many nerves, it would be insane. So this is a way to conserve space in your body. And it makes sense. And once again, it's called a motor unit. I'm sorry if I jumped ahead a little bit. And what will happen, the nerve extension, which is that part of the nerve right there, that's known as an axon. So an axon is this kind of long strip in between two different parts of the neuron or the nerve cell. It's going to have a cell body, which is going to be here. And we're going to talk more about this in the nervous system. Then it's going to have what looks like this kind of long tail. That's the axon, and that's going to be where the signal is sent. And then it's going to have these branching ends, which are called axon terminals. So the signal only goes one way in a nerve, which in this case is that way. And again, we'll talk a lot more about it in the nervous system, but that is how this works. Now, what's going to be sent is something called an action potential. And what that means is you either send the signal or you don't. That's it. You can't kind of send it. So there's a kind of more scientific, I guess, picture of a nerve cell. But there's your cell body. Now, these things here are called dendrites, and we will talk more about this in the nervous system. But these guys are going to receive the signal from something. from another nerve cell, from a sense organ, whatever. Then they're going to send it down this long tail, which we already called an axon. Now, the axon is surrounded by this kind of fatty material, or a lipid material, known as a myelin sheath. And that's going to allow the impulse to speed up. And once again, we'll talk way more about this in the nervous system. And then there's your axon terminal. So if this was a motor unit, there'd be a muscle cell there, a muscle cell here, a muscle cell here. You get the idea. So that one nerve can actually have an effect on many, many, many muscle cells. Once again, a motor unit. Now, how the heck do these cells tell other cells what to do? Well, they're going to use a chemical called a neurotransmitter. And they are, once again, chemical messengers. And they're going to happen between the gap between two cells. So I'll kind of draw a zoom in right here. If that's a nerve cell right there, and that's a muscle cell right there, so we'll put N for nerve and M for muscle, there's going to be little receptors on here. So the neurotransmitter, they're going to be sitting in these things called vesicles that are going to be at the end of the axon terminal, so they're going to be right there. And let's say they're going to be little triangles, let's just say. So right now, that nerve cell is not doing anything. It's just waiting. But when the action potential comes down, which will come zipping down the nerve cell, it's going to release these little neurotransmitters, these little triangles. And in this case, when the little triangle meets the receptor, it will tell the muscle to do something. And in the case of this specific neurotransmitter known as acetylcholine, that is going to have one job, and that's going to tell the muscle to contract. And here's kind of a zoom in of it too right there. So you can see there's the axon terminal, there's those little triangles, and you can see the receptors on the muscle cell right there. And once the contraction is done, there's going to be a really cool enzyme called acetylcholinesterase that'll come in and wipe out all of the excess neurotransmitters. So it's a pretty neat system. But what happens is each nerve that fires to tell a muscle what to do, it almost has to reset itself, and we'll talk about that in a sec. So this thing called an action potential is kind of looks, we'll see it on the next slide, but it looks sort of kind of like a heartbeat, something like that. And what it is, it's very short lasting. It's milliseconds long. I mean, it's quick. Now what's going to happen is it's going to allow a signal to be sent down a nerve, which is then going to release neurotransmitters. Then it has to be able to reset itself. So let's say every time you bend your arm or you bend your finger or whatever, that's sending a signal. Bend, reset. Bend, reset. Bend, reset. And that reset point is kind of right there. So it's going to bend, reset, bend, reset, bend, reset. And that's every time you bend, you sent an action potential. Every time you sent an action potential, you released neurotransmitters. Every time you released neurotransmitters, you told your muscle to contract. And again, it's pretty neat. And these are once again called excitable cells, which would be your neurons, which are excited, and muscle cells. Now, you could also have your muscles hurt, and then that's going to send a signal back to your brain known as sensory, but we're only talking about one way here for now. We're only talking about the contraction end. We'll talk about the pain and the signal back in the nervous system. So if you look at your action potential, it looks sort of kind of like a heartbeat. So here's in your resting stage, and it's somewhere around negative 70 millivolts, something like that. And again, you're not going to need to know that for this class. But this would be your nerve doing nothing. Then it's going to depolarize and then repolarize in milliseconds. This is extremely small amount of time. And then you return back to resting state. So let's say you only want to bend your arm once. Well, then you send one action potential and you're good. If you want to bend your arm more than once, then you send another action potential and so on. So acetylcholine, once again, is used up after the action potential and converted into acetic acid and choline. That's the ACH. And that's what the acetylcholinesterase does for you, which, again, kind of neat. And if you didn't do that, if you didn't break down the acetylcholine into these two products, your muscle would keep on contracting, and that would be very bad, especially if you didn't want to move or do whatever. And again, if you're wasting all this energy contracting muscles you don't need, you're going to run out of potential energy, and it's going to be bad. So that's this beautiful system that all works together. And the last slide for this section is known as the all or none deal. So what happens is, if a muscle cell gets the signal to contract from the nervous system, it either contracts or it doesn't. Now keep in mind, this says muscle cell. Now, is it possible that a muscle has a lot of muscle cells? The answer, of course, is yes. And that's why you can do kind of like a very slow bend, let's say, of your arm, because to contract that entire muscle, there's a lot of muscle cells. But the point is that once each cell gets its signal, it contracts. If you send that signal to a lot of muscle cells at the same time and they all contract, well, then you're going to bend your arm. But if you only want to bend your arm a little bit, or you only want to move your finger a little teeny weeny bit, not totally close up your fist, then you're sending the signal to only a few muscle cells. But once again, once that cell gets its signal, it either contracts or it doesn't. That's it. It doesn't kind of contract. The muscle will kind of work slow, and that's what's known as a graded response. That's the muscle. But remember, each muscle cell can either contract or not. With the exception of a muscle twitch, which many of you have. Some of you may get it in your eye. Christina Burns, this is a shout out to you. Towards the end of the year last year, you had eye twitches, and that was pretty fun when we talked about that, because I get the same exact thing. So that is where all of your muscles will all of the cells will kind of fire at the same time, causing you to either jump or to have your eye twitch, or sometimes your face may twitch, something like that. And that's a wrap up of video 2.